Hey guys, so we are doing my mom's brake pads on our rotors. So we have all the tools to do the job, and we will be blocking the wheels on the passenger side, jacking it up. I have 2 axle stands, I probably only need 1. And I'll take the tire, put it underneath the truck as added support if it does decide to fall, which it hopefully won't. But to do this job, you can do it with hand tools, but I'm not really one of those kind of guys. So here we go. Now you'll see me using a tie strap, but it's better to use well, I've used zip ties too, but it's best to use a bungee cord. I didn't have any handy, so I grabbed this. It does the trick, but it's best to use anything so you don't drop your caliper, and or if it falls, so it doesn't damage the rubber line, because you don't want to be replacing those, because then you have to bleed your brakes and all that other nonsense. And I do recommend bleeding your brakes. This time I didn't do that, but it's up to you. You're the mechanic. Here you'll see I'm showing the brake pads, and you'll see how thin they are. I'll show the other side too. And it's a lot thicker, so you have to check both sides when inspecting your brake pads. As soon as I see one that's worn, I just automatically replace both, and on both sides. And if your brake pad is worn enough where it digs into the rotor, you replace the rotor as well. That was me comparing the old brake pad to the new brake pad, and it's quite the difference. Lots of meat on the new one. Here you'll see me inspecting the brake pads. You'll see me inspecting the sliders, and I'm looking at how everything fits together so that when I take it apart, it fits the same way when I reassemble it. A good way to do this, especially with drum brakes, is to take photos with your smartphone, camera, whatever, and that way when you go to reassemble it, you have a point of reference, because the stuff you find online for reference might not be what you have in front of you. And the same goes for the parts. There are subtle similarities between years of vehicles, For example, a friend of mine has a Geo, and on one side it has a newer version of the hanger. On the passenger side of that vehicle, it has an older version. So her rims that she bought for her year and vehicle do not fit it. However, because a year earlier it had a thicker caliper, I guess, it still would fit on the vehicle with the stock rims, but the aftermarket steel rims would not fit for her winter tires. So it's just good to double check everything, because some parts will work, some parts will not. Here you see me adding anti-seize to the sliders. Now I add anti-seize to both the bottom and the top of the sliders to prevent rust, corrosion, whatever. I also add it to the hub for the rim to sit. I add it to the rotor in the front where the rim meets the rotor. And I also add it to the studs for the lug nuts. So everything is able to move as it should. But be careful not to get it on the brake rotor, and be careful not to get it on the brake pads, because those are not meant to have any kind of lubrication whatsoever. Time to gently push the piston back into the caliper. Now I'm going to put the piston caliper, or the caliper and the piston back in. To do that is a good idea to remove the brake reservoir cap. The next thing you're going to want to do is use some sort of C-clamp. And I'll show you that in a moment, how to gently force the piston back into the caliper. Now there are specialized pieces of equipment that are inexpensive that can compress the piston back into the caliper. I just use a C-clamp, and this happens to be a woodworking C-clamp. I could not find any of my smaller C-clamps for welding and such and whatnot. I'm sure they're just somewhere put away nice and waiting for me whenever I find them again. If you've seen my workshop, you'd understand. But I use a open-ended wrench to go across the piston to push it back into the caliper. Once I get it right, the positioning of everything, because it's so daggone big, it will be gently pushed back into the caliper. Now that I'm reinstalling the caliper back onto the hanger, I anti-seize the bolts, which, by the way, were dry and a little bit worn. I would recommend replacing them. And I also anti-seized the piston, just the piston. I didn't touch the rubber seal. And I also anti-seized the other side of the caliper so that it will rub against the brake pads. It doesn't grind into them, so that everything moves freely as it should. You'll notice for some things I am using my hand tools, and you'll notice also that I haven't been using a torque wrench. I've never really used the torque wrench a lot, but it is something I do recommend for both your lug nuts and or any of this kind of equipment, because everything has a engineered set a certain amount of foot-pounds so that they don't shear and so they don't back off. So it is highly recommended that you use a proper torque wrench in any part of your vehicle. I, in the future, will be doing this. I just have to locate my torque wrenches. And again, everything is a disarray. So once I find out where they are, I will make sure they are always handy, and I will make sure to always check the torque specifications. When reinstalling the wheel, make sure that your lug nuts are lubricated with anti-seize, and or your studs are lubricated with anti-seize. And when you put the wheel on, it's best to first put them on with your hand, like put the lug nuts on with your hand and just loose, and then tighten them down with your impact, whether it's air-powered or electrical, just so that you don't cross-thread anything, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen Honda Civics in the parking lot and I look down and I see their lug nuts and they're just slightly twisted and or missing, and I'm like, I know exactly what you did and didn't do. Also, tightening your lug nuts in a star pattern and tightening them slowly and then forcefully. So you do them in a star pattern, make them slightly snug, and then go back around again and fastening them. So first hand tight, and then whatever the torque specifications are. And we are done. The driver's side. Now I'm going to turn the wheels to the passenger side to make it easier to access the caliper bolts. So these are the brakes that I took off. That'll be the one side of the pad. There's like nothing left of that. This would be the other side of the pad, which is, there's some meat to that, but you always, if you see one down, you replace them both. This was the other side of that pad. So yeah, there's 3 pieces to that. And that just kind of fell off. So these definitely need to be changed. You're about to have problems. We're gonna let the truck down, but we want to, we want to put the cap back on, and that's normal to see the fluid level that high. So once we put the cap back on, close the hood, there we go, locked in place, and then we'll bring the truck down and go for a test drive. When you first go out in the test drive, your brakes will be very mushy. Just do a couple brake checks, nothing hard, very soft, and then ease into it. Allow the brakes to seat themselves. Always be careful, and this has never happened to me. Watch it, boom. Yep, the jack just slipped off. So always be careful.